Hey friends. Um, Today was sort of it's one of those days where I feel something kind of bubbling under the surface, but not quite coming through. And it was really interesting because I did a practice session this morning as usual with my daughter. I've been issuing reports periodically on this post and to anyone who will listen about how that's going. And it's been a really interesting period because something came up in a conversation with my wife 2 days ago on Sunday. She said she'd listened to a podcast about middle age, and she came across a phrase or was introduced to a phrase called the dark night of the ego, which apparently was, somebody on this podcast was sort of describing middle age as a period where we've been accumulating not necessarily stuff, right? We could be accumulating experiences, we could be accumulating skills, we could be accumulating wealth and material possessions, of course, but the more important than the things being accumulated is the act of accumulation. And then somewhere around middle age, we expire of enthusiasm for that, and we have the impulse to start editing and actually cutting out aspects of our life that are not serving us, accumulating less, getting rid of a lot of things, and if we continue to accumulate, only accumulating a very kind of select subset of the things we might have been accumulating all along so far. And I think about this related very much to me. This related to me in a deep way because something I know about myself as a young person, well, even as a, I'd say for most of my life, I've been somebody who enjoys accumulating skills. I enjoy accumulating abilities. It's almost like I feel liberated by developing a competence in a new area. It's like that's one more way in which I am now free to express myself, or free to, maybe I just have autonomy in that area of life in some way. But it's something that I've known about myself for a long time because it was pretty easy to observe in myself. And I thought about this idea that at some point we decide to start editing. And we decide to start editing not just the stuff we accumulate, but the skills, in my case, that I accumulate. It starts to be, and I've had this experience as well, it has started to be and continues to be no longer that interesting to accumulate skills and competencies, excellences even, simply for the sake of it. It doesn't feel that liberating anymore. And I think there was something in me, maybe there still is in some ways, there was something in me that really needed that skill accumulation thing, really got I relied on it in some ways for ego stability, let's call it. And so it's interesting to observe, it has been interesting to observe that that no longer really satisfies me. And it's interesting to observe, back to my sort of opening observation here, as I was practicing with my daughter this morning, I didn't really recognize it on the session, but sort of afterwards, I recognized that if I either teach and or expect my daughter to develop her skills for the same reason, and I would never consciously do this, but I would just kind of subconsciously be coming from the same place in trying to impart a skill to her. If I'm doing that, I'm kind of mucking up the process of her learning journey, because her learning journey may have nothing to do with my fixation on skill building as an important aspect of my life. It might not be something that helps her or that she necessarily is enthusiastic about. I mean, the thing is, there's a certain kind of learning and there's a certain kind of cognitive development that I think my particular proclivity definitely bolsters and definitely supports. You do develop your awareness in a way when through that sort of like, oh, I want to learn this, I want to learn this, I want to learn this, and not just like totally scattershot, but like really kind of deeply mastering things to the point where they become integrated into the way you see other things. There's certainly something to be said for it, but it's not the only way to get mastery, and it's certainly not the only way to live a fulfilling life. So I noticed I have been noticing over the past couple of weeks that if I'm coming from that place in myself, and it's hard to identify, I can't always see it. Sometimes I can, but it's only kind of just rearing its head as something that's on the landscape of my awareness. It's kind of been right down here, like right below the surface. Comes up, says hi, and goes away again. But it's only just I've only just started to kind of notice that, oh, I'm teaching the way I learn. And funny enough, I've met students and I've attracted students who are in some ways, maybe they're not as manic as I have been about this, but they're on some level, they're people who are fascinated by developing their own mastery of something. And so anyway, not to digress, when I see myself doing that with my daughter, it's like, okay, well, maybe that's where some of this resistance is coming from. Because it's almost like when I let it go, the resistance goes away. When I bring it back, the resistance comes back. It's almost like I have an on-off switch. It's just that I don't have perfect control over the on-off switch. I wish I could just like put it in the off position and leave it there. But unfortunately, I turn it off and then I go and get pulled into something that activates it, and I just go over here and I flick the switch back on, and before you know it, I'm back at it. So it's been interesting to observe that, and it has been. So just to kind of come full circle with the podcast conversation that I had with my wife, she talked about how the dark night of the ego, which was this phrase that they used, is this reckoning with who we think we are, who we think we have been up until now. And if we have been in a state of accumulation and building our ego in a way, not the negative kind of like selfish ego, but I'm saying like the self, building ourself, the self structure, self-organizing principle, which is how I usually use the word ego. Occasionally when I use the word ego, I'm talking about the narcissistic, self-oriented aspect of ourselves that is like keeping us small and fixated. But usually when I use the word ego, I'm talking about the whole self structure, like everything that is manifest in us. It includes, in the way Sadhguru would say it, all of our karma, the sum total of the memory we have accumulated in our physical bodies, in our emotional body, in our psychic body, in our spiritual body, right? That's our ego. That's our ego structure. And in middle age, somewhere around middle age, we realize we're not, it doesn't make sense or feel good to just keep building that. I want to know where I'm building, and I want to know what I'm not building. It's like I have less energy to just accumulate, and therefore I have to be a little more judicious and a little more intelligent with what I do with that energy, what I'm building. Or if maybe I'm spending more of my time letting go. So I found it a really helpful phrase and a really helpful concept to integrate and to kind of use to illustrate where I'm at, and in a number of different areas of my life, this is showing up as being relevant. So that's where I am today, people. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. If this sparks anything for you, send me a comment. I'd love to hear it. But thanks for tuning in. I'll see you again soon.